pants until my butt was on the linoleum.
At the time, Doubleday's policy was to split the money from paperback sales evenly with the author. Stephen got $200,000, enough for him to give up teaching and write full-time. Sadly, one of the people who mattered most to Stephen never took part in his success. His mother had seen the manuscript for Carrie, and she knew that Doubleday was going to publish it, but she never saw the book. In December 1973, after a long, painful battle with lung cancer, Ruth King died. She was 59 years old.
You know, here he had finally hit the big time, and his mother had just seen a glimpse of it, and he'd wished, you know, that she just could have lived long to see him go on. As you know, at the time, Carrie had sold him the paperbacks after she died, and I think he was just remorse that she was never going to see him go even further, and it was a sad funeral.
Stephen was devastated, especially when he learned after his mother's death that the $5 a week she'd sent him at college often meant that she'd gone without food. But he also realized that she had given him much more than the money. Ruth had worked hard and persevered, and those same qualities had got him started. But Stephen now had to wrestle with another demon. Would he be just a one-book wonder?
Ooh.
In 1973, 26-year-old Stephen King received a $200,000 advance for the paperback rights for his first novel, Carrie, a book that he had originally thrown away. The money turned him from a struggling English teacher into a published author with enough money to give up his job and do what he'd been dreaming about since he was 11 years old, write full-time. It also allowed him, for the first time in his life, to indulge himself.
I remember as an undergraduate he would talk about when he sold his first novel, he was going to buy I believe it was a pink Cadillac convertible, and come back to campus with his big car and sort of drive around.
King decided against the pink Cadillac. Instead, he bought a red, white and blue one, although he was still humble enough to leave it behind when he went home to visit his friends in Durham.
And he drove this like 64 Dodge Dart, all rusted out, ugliest looking car you ever saw. And he said, you know, he just was a little embarrassed coming back home driving that great big red, white and blue Cadillac. So he drove this $100 car.
The money didn't change Stephen all that much. He was still modest, and he was still afraid that he would never be a successful writer. Carrie, he thought, might be a fluke, and he didn't know if he was just a one-book wonder.
This is not a dumb man, and I think he felt, I got it, but it can also go away. I'm going to enjoy it while it's here.
Stephen wrote constantly, churning out 1,500 words a day. His inspiration came from the people he met, events in his own life, and day-to-day life in rural Maine. His next book, Salem's Lot, was a story about Dracula, set in a small Maine town. He sent the manuscript off to Doubleday. They bought the book and sold the paperback rights for $500,000. Again, Stephen got half. His first two novels had made him almost $500,000, phenomenal for a new writer, and there was the promise of more money from the movies. With the success of Rosemary's Baby, horror was hot in Hollywood, and Columbia Pictures optioned his first book, Carrie. But King couldn't shake the fear that he would fail at what he wanted so badly. He thought a change of scene might inspire more books, and for the first time in his life, he had the financial freedom to leave Maine. In autumn 1974, the Kings climbed into their new Cadillac and drove to Boulder, Colorado. In Boulder, Stephen had trouble focusing on work. He started one story after another, but nothing clicked. Thinking a few days off might help, he asked the locals where he and Tabitha and the children could spend a quiet weekend. They recommended the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park.
And they were, in fact, getting ready to shut down for the winter season. They check in, and they practically have the whole hotel to themselves. King's imagination started going into overtime. He would walk down the hall, and he would see a fire hose all coiled up, and in his mind, he could visualize it and hear it thumping on the ground, coming to life.
he began working on the story of a little boy with paranormal powers who is in danger of being overcome by the evil in the haunted Overlook Hotel, and whose life is threatened by his drunken father. This wasn't just another horror story. Stephen was writing about his own experiences.
Anybody who's been married 3 or 4 years, who's coping with basically no funds and everything else, there's a lot of stress, interpersonal stress, and a lot of that stuff went into the novel that I wrote, The Shining, that had to do with booze, that had to do with anger, with a lot of the things that I felt at that time.
King finished The Shining in Colorado, but though Boulder had inspired him, Stephen's heart was in the East. He missed New England's small towns, and in 1975, he and his family returned to Maine. Stephen's second book, Salem's Lot, was released around Halloween. A paperback quickly followed. It sold well to readers of horror fiction, but late in 1976, a whole new audience discovered Stephen King when the movie Carrie was released, starring Sissy Spacek. It was a box office smash. The film, made for less than $2 million, grossed $30 million in the United States alone. Stephen loved it. He loved what director Brian De Palma had done with the film, and loved reaching a whole new audience. And with the success of Carrie, Hollywood loved him.
What the film Carrie did was it put King on the map in a way that a book just won't. You want to get people that aren't going to go into the bookstore. These are the non-book readers. You know, a movie like Carrie will get them into the stores.
Big sales gave Stephen the confidence to ask Doubleday to publish his books that had been rejected before Carrie was released. Stephen was keen to have the first novel he ever wrote, Rage, published. The story was about a student who takes over a school and holds his classmates hostage. But Doubleday didn't want to saturate the market with his name, so he convinced his paperback publishers to release Rage under the pseudonym Richard Bachman.
Rage by Richard Bachman came and sank like a stone. I mean, the world was not looking for a Richard Bachman book. And I think he was somewhat disappointed by that.
But they were looking for the next Stephen King book, and in 1977, Doubleday published The Shining. 50,000 hardback copies were sold, and Stephen was then in a whole new league. It was his first hardback bestseller. The paperback went on to sell almost 2.5 million copies. Stephen King's first 3 books were all bestsellers, but with his 4th book, The Stand, published in 1978, King produced his masterpiece.
This book here is probably everybody's favorite, the one they strive to get. It sells in excess of $1,200 now.
The Stand is, in terms of King's fiction, it's unique. Here's a man who can write characters large and small, much like a Dickens landscape.
The Stand is an apocalyptic novel about a superflu that kills most of the population. Survivors are engaged in a battle of good against evil. The original manuscript was 12,000 pages long. Doubleday refused to release it before Stephen cut it by 400 pages. Stephen had made millions for Doubleday, and he felt he should have his say in the matter, but they insisted. To make matters worse, because of an earlier contract that doled out money in small yearly increments, he wasn't even seeing his share of the profits. But what finished it for Stephen was the way the executives at Doubleday treated their #1 author.
Every time he came to New York to meet me or to, go over a manuscript, whatever it was, it seemed that every time that I was walking the halls with him and some of the brass would go by, they never once recognized him. I'd have to introduce him again.
In 1978, he quit Doubleday and negotiated a deal with New American Library, his paperback book publishers. They gave him a $2.5 million advance for 3 books. He'd come a long way from the writer who just 7 years before had wept with joy at his $2,500 advance for Carrie. He would never again be a struggling writer. He had money and fame, but he soon learned that his good fortune came at a price.